Joining us now, great friend of the show, Richard Hanania. He is out with a new book, Public Choice Theory and the Illusion of Grand Strategy. Richard's been a great source of this show, particularly during the Afghanistan debacle. There was one story we wanted to get his take on, but also to talk about his book. So let's put that up there on the screen. Who won in Afghanistan? Well, it's private contractors who, it turns out, netted trillions of dollars while they were over there. Richard, talk to us a little bit about that and tie it to your fantastic book, which thank you very much, by the way, for sending it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So my book argues, I've been studying international relations sort of as you guys are, as just a consumer of the news, but also academically. And so I've read, pretty much, all the important thinkers in international relations, the theories about what we're supposedly doing overseas. And I think that, I just came to the conclusion that people are basically thinking about the whole thing wrong, whether they think the U.S. Should have a prominent role in world affairs, whether they believe in support this war or that war. I think that the problem is, we think that there's actually somebody in charge, that there is a grand strategy where sort of like wise men are sitting around and sort of determining what the U.S. should be doing about Afghanistan, about Iraq, about the rise of China, about any number of things. And, I don't think that that's actually what's happening. I think Afghanistan is such a good way to sort of introduce people to the rest of what foreign policy is like, because the mistakes and the blunders and the sort of how disastrous it is and the waste and everything else. I mean, it's just so obvious and it's so clear. And it's been like that for 20 years. So yeah, that money in Afghanistan, the war of Afghanistan, just like the war in Iraq, the money runs into the spending runs into the trillions. A lot of it was government contractors, and the government contractors would do everything from build girls schools to supply the U.S. bases, to provide security. And these people got very, very wealthy. I mean, these people are one of the reasons why Washington D.C. has now basically every single one of the wealthiest counties in the country are around Washington D.C.
Yeah, that's right.
This is these people who made money off of Afghanistan, who made money off Iraq. We left Afghanistan, and the same people are in charge as they were when we originally went in. But yeah, I think foreign policy. I mean, I think it demonstrates that foreign policy is working. I mean, you could look at Iraq too. You say, what did we gain out of Iraq? Well, it didn't work. There's no actual tangible benefit you can point to for the American people there. But go look up every single person who was involved in the Iraq war. What are they doing now? They're not in jail. They haven't suffered any financial harm. Wolfowitz went on to lead the World Bank. Some of them are at the Hudson Institute, where people still tell us about what we should do on foreign policy next. So if you understand foreign policy in this way, and this is a theme of my book, it's working. It's working the way the system is designed for certain interests, and it's helping those interests, and it's sort of working as designed. While if you think of in terms of national interest, you're going to be constantly confused by what we're doing overseas.
Right.
That's so well said. I mean, it seems to me that the people who get richest in Washington are the people who are willing to do the sketchiest stuff. So whether it's like war profiteering or selling yourself to the sketchiest possible foreign governments, those are the people who get really rich in this area. I think we have the book jacket we can put up on the screen. It's called Public Choice Theory and the Illusion of Grand Strategy: How Generals, Weapons Manufacturers, and Foreign Governments Shape American Foreign Policy. So Richard, take us through Afghanistan as a great case example here. I mean, how were these decisions made? How's the decision initially made to go in? How's the decision made to just continue and stay the course and lie to people and continue in this direction that we know has been and ultimately was a complete failure?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we ask the question, how was the decision made, it implies that a decision was made. And really, it basically wasn't. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, I go through Iraq and Afghanistan. I have quotes from people who were involved in these decisions, and they themselves will tell you, we never talked about it. What were we going to do in Afghanistan? 9/11, something, it happened. We wanted to go back. We wanted to get revenge. We wanted to bring the people to justice. So they went into Afghanistan, and there was just no planning about what would happen after. They basically ended up drawing a constitution. It was done by people like the State Department and UN types who have these, standard idea of what makes a good government. So they just sort of implemented that on Afghanistan. We worked with the warlords, and then the U.S. troops were just basically walking around around and not doing much. And there wasn't actually that violent for the first few years. Bush administration attention switched over to Iraq, and then Iraq is an entire different story. But yeah, this is basically what happened. And then Obama comes in, a decade later after this sort of drift, and he sort of is skeptical of the mission. The generals, they go and they basically do a full-on PR campaign. They're teaming up with Congress and saying, this is going to be a big disaster for, if Obama doesn't double down, this is going to be a disaster for the country. There's going to be the terrorist threat's going to go up, and they're leaking things to the Washington Post and other papers. And Obama decides to stay. Trump, it's the exact same story. I mean, that's what's so fascinating. He comes in and
Right.
he's skeptical, and they basically just bully him and beat him down until he decides to continue on. And they try to do the same thing with Biden. And you can see how the justification changes throughout the whole process. So first it was terrorism. Then you had the Bush doctrine. It became sort of folded in with Iraq. With the Bush doctrine, the idea that you needed to democratize the world, or at least the Muslim countries, that started because they couldn't find the WMDs. Nobody talked about this before. There was no WMD. So Bush sort of needed a reason for Iraq to still make sense. Afghanistan sort of got caught up in that. And then in 2020, we're talking about women's rights in China and whatever. They're just throwing it whatever they can against the wall and seeing whatever sticks. So a lot of stuff works like this. Basically, you have these interests, they want a policy, and they're reverse engineering whatever arguments they want to make around the policy. And the policy is always keep doing what we're doing. If we have
Yes.
a commitment to a country, or we're in a certain region of the world, we have to stay. One of the things I point out in my book, and this is very interesting, that if you look at the countries that have the most U.S. troops right now, they're the same countries that had the most U.S. troops stationed there in 1950. So it's Germany,
Wow.
Italy, Japan, South Korea. So the U.S. is still occupying the Axis powers and basically fighting the Korean War, right? And I think 50, 60 years from now, we could still be doing the exact same thing, and everyone will have a reason why we need to be in Germany, Italy, Japan. I mean, we have to think, when Krystal said, the people willing to do sketchy things, I think they're people who, I think it selects for that, yes, but also for people who are able to convince themselves, what they need to believe. So I think a lot of these foreign policy people are sincere, but it's very easy to predict what their views are going to be, because all you have to do is think, well, whatever the U.S. is doing right now has to be kept being
So
done,
true.
and you're usually going to be correct. You're usually going to be able to predict their views on any particular issue.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to follow up with. Is it just as simple as follow the money? Or is it follow the money and the power and the ideology? Like, what are the interests actually at stake here?
I think we really underplay the money, because I don't think money is everything. I think power and the ideology is very important. But look, the money is absolutely huge. So when you have basically every 3- and 4-star general now, when retiring, going to work for a defense contractor, it's 100% or close to it in the last decade and a half. Basically, anytime you see a general, and he's near the end of his career, he's going to be working for a weapons manufacturer or some kind of government contractor soon. So in any other industry, we sort of look at this and we get suspicious. There was a Post story I was involved in where they basically talked about this, that these people are, they're on boards of, Boeing or whatever corporation, and they're not being introduced they're not being introduced by people telling them this is actually a corporate representative. Nikki Haley, when she was on Boeing, I think she left the board, but when she was there, they'd say Nikki Haley's former UN ambassador. They wouldn't say Nikki Haley, current board member of Boeing. So the money is important, and the ideology works with it, because I think what the money does is it follows the people with the correct ideology. So it's both. So I think someone like John Bolton. It's funny when you read John Bolton's memoir. He's talking about like how busy he is because all these corporate consultants want him, and like he's going to be he's on the phone and having to juggle like all these commitments just because he's like such a hit in business. I think John Bolton, I think he believes. I think he believes in something. He seems to love war more than even his self-interest would recommend. But it's people like that who are going to rise to the top because they have the right ideology to be supported with the people with the resources and power. So you can't say really it's either or. I think you need both to make for American foreign policy.
It's so true. You know, I suffered through a master's program in American foreign policy, came up with a lot of these people. I've filtered through some of the institutions that you talk about. And you're exactly right, which is that the money and the success, what happens is you just get elevated and helped and propelled and more if you happen to have this right ideology. It's like a thing that follows you all the way up to the top, and you get very comfortable. You don't want to question a lot of assumptions. And if you do change your mind, well, it's not very convenient for you to do so. Something that struck out to me that you wrote here, which I loved, is American foreign policy is better explained by assuming individuals within the system seek out their own personal gain rather than assuming actors work towards goals consistent with some conception of the national interest. Can you elaborate on that in terms of the deep state and how and why we get the terrible foreign policy outcomes that we do get? Why is that selfish for them to do so?
So yeah, it's so you have to think about what are the goals of the system, and the goals of the system doesn't mean someone designed the system this way, but you're thinking about the constituent parts, and you're thinking about sort of what people's individual incentives are. So people are getting very, very wealthy off of American foreign policy. I mean, the Pentagon budget is 700 something billion a year. I think it might have reached 800 billion by now, and that's just for the budget. When there's a war going on, it's much higher because we need to there's supplemental funding going to Iraq or Afghanistan. That money goes somewhere, and that money goes into people's pockets. And it's not just you should just sort of imply that it's just money. It's also prestige and status. I mean, these people like Stanley McChrystal and H.R. McMaster, they become sort of celebrities, and they're brought on MSNBC after they're retired, and they're talked to like they're wise men who have a lot to tell us about. They have a lot to tell us about the world and geopolitics. I think there's the politicians and the voters too. I think that's another important part of the analysis. I think what happened with the war on terror is I think that the Bush administration understood very early on that keeping the war on terror going, getting people scared, was good for George Bush's political prospects. He was at 90% approval. I think if he said, if he went into Afghanistan, overthrew the Taliban, and said, this whole thing is over, he probably would have ended up like his father, who ended the Gulf War too early. I think that if George H.W. Bush stayed in Iraq for a while, he would have had a better chance of winning re-election, right? People would have been moved on to something else. So I think that these sort of these instincts. I think there's a psychology at sort of the mass level. I think Americans have been conditioned to think of every problem in the world as their own, and to sort of see as it a little bit weird if politicians are not sort of policing the world at this point. And I think there's a lot of people in the media who are have an interest in pushing that view. I mean, the media itself too. I mean, it's all access journalism. It's not like any other field of journalism. I mean, the entirety of national security reporting is basically you get ahead because the people in power like you.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot of it's classified information, getting the right leaks, getting the right access. There was a woman named Robin Wright who just went over to the Middle East and was touring around with the generals in Iraq and Syria, and her views on Iran were basically representing their views. They're not going to give an anti-war person that kind of access. So yeah, there's a system here, and I think that even people who are skeptical of foreign policy, they sort of elevate the foreign policy elite by saying they have a grand strategy, but it just happens to be wrong. I don't think that's the correct way of looking at it. I think the correct way of looking at it is, look, there's these interests, and they're trying to sell you something like a tobacco lobbyist might. Right. And you sort of just have to be cognizant of that.
So true.
So what do we do? How do we limit the influence in particular of the military-industrial complex?
Yeah, so I mean, I have some recommendations at the end of the book. So these people really their secret is the status quo. So there's a lot of inertia built in the system. So if we have troops in a country or an area, we're going to stay there. We're probably going to stay there for a while, right? If we're not there, if the U.S. wasn't in Korea right now or wasn't in Germany, nobody would be sending them to Germany or Korea. So I think that the best strategy is to have a president who basically just wants to rip off the Band-Aid. This is what Biden did in Afghanistan. I think it was probably good politics in the end, even though it hurt him. I mean, I think that we've moved beyond that now, and he's not still dealing with Afghanistan, right? Which is what would be happening if he'd stayed. So I think that the president has a lot of power here. I think Trump. If you had someone with sort of Trump's instincts, but a little bit better ability to execute, you can fundamentally change American foreign policy. You can pull back on a lot of these commitments, and you can also you also also think in terms of lobbying. I mean, you could have things like disclosure. You could have some kind of you could have rules about what you can do after you're retired. But I think the point is it's a sort of the system, because it has so much inertia, because basically we keep doing what we're doing. It means that if you can change it, if you can just find the opportunity to just sort of do something different, that tends to be sticky, and it's hard for them to just go back to whatever the status quo was. So, politics matters a lot, leadership matters a lot, and I think that's where we have to look for change.
Completely agree. Richard, we encourage everybody to go buy the Kindle version of the book, which is affordable. We'll have a link down there in the description. Really appreciate it, man. Congratulations. It really is a fantastic read. It's been well reviewed and all of that. And it's just a voice that we need more than ever in our discourse. So thanks.
So little political coverage of foreign policy actually explains what's really going on. So thank you for breaking all of that down. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. If you could support us, it means the world. We literally walk through the snow for you, quite literally, in order to make sure
wish
to
me
get
luck
it
getting
here.
home today, guys.
Yeah, seriously. Everybody, please wish Krystal luck. In all seriousness, we just want you guys to know that through the new year and looking back, like, we've got big plans here about what we're doing, talking about it yesterday. I don't know if I had officially announced this, but we did bring somebody on in order to post the show on YouTube. He's been doing a really great, on Instagram. He's been doing a really great job. It's Breaking Points YT is the handle. All the clips are up there by the end of the day, so you could share those with your family and friends if you want to. We both have our personal accounts there as well, where we'll be posting a little bit more. We want to grow the presence of the show, bring it to the people who may want it on different platforms, and we're bringing people on to help spread the message. More importantly, though, give you guys more content, more value for what you provide us. So thank you for your support. Link is down there in the description.
Yep. We love you guys. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you back here on Thursday.
See you Thursday.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.